So Bloom's taxonomy, it was developed by an educator named Benjamin Bloom in the 1950s. And then in 2000, it got a major update and revision from a lot of Bloom's students and collaborators. And it kind of functions as a universal rubric that moves from the concrete to the abstract and helps you give some specific levels to mastery, and whether that's skill mastery or content knowledge mastery.
Right.
So I have it up here as a pyramid, and we'll start from the bottom and work our way to the top. So the lowest level of the taxonomy is remembering, and then you have understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and then the very top level is creating. So when we talk about remembering, that's your very basic, I can spit back these facts, this data, I can tell you the definition of the word, that sort of thing.
Right.
And that's the basis for our knowledge and understanding of topics. Understanding is being able to use it in context, use it in a sentence, tell me what this means, give me some background information. And those two levels, remembering and understanding, are pretty closely tied together because they're very similar. It can be hard to distinguish between the two sometimes.
Right, but like for what we see with kids on the autism spectrum, the remembering part they can do very well, but when they have to move it from one concept to another, that's where the understanding comes in. That becomes, it's a very difficult step for some of them to take.
Yeah. So if you had to, like, say you were doing a unit on charts and graphs and understanding averages. So the remembering might be, all right, tell me the difference between mean, median, and mode. Those are three important terms for statistics. But then understanding is, all right, on this chart, what are the mean, median, and mode values? Can you point them out to me? The third level after that is applying. So this is where you can start to answer questions and solve problems. So if you had thinking of another chart, if you had like a stock price chart of taking a company's stock price over time, you might ask what year had the biggest difference between their high and their low prices. So that's an analysis, or that's an application question where you have to be able to look at the material, plug some numbers in, and figure out how to spit out the right answer. The fourth level is analyzing. So this is where you're starting to really move from the concrete to the abstract. This is where you can start doing compare and contrast kinds of questions, where you're starting to ask your own research questions, where you can test a hypothesis, that sort of thing. So if you had that stock price chart and a company timeline, so now you have two different pieces of data, being able to say what year, or looking at the two events, the stock prices and the timeline, which events on the timeline seem to have had the biggest positive impact on stock price. So you're having to make connections between two different pieces of information, and that's what analyzing is all about.
Right. Yeah, it's the taking the understanding and up to a whole nother level. It's just kind of go beyond that applying part.
Yep. And if you're a fan of classical education, you're probably seeing some connections to the grammar, logic, and rhetoric stages here. So remembering and understanding would be the grammar stage. Applying and analyzing is the logic stage. And then the last two, evaluating and creating, are the rhetoric stage. So in evaluating, you're being able to make arguments to justify and rank value or rank order. You're able to start asking questions about the questions. Like an evaluation kind of problem might be, let's say you wanted to create a visualization of lion populations in 20 different African countries. What would be the best way to visualize that data? So now that's a real tricky thing to do, because not only do you don't even have to solve the problem. Like, you're not actually asked to make the visualization, but you have to know enough about different kinds of maps and charts and graphs to figure out what's the right tool for the job. So if you say, all right, we're going to do a bar graph, well, that's a different evaluation than a heat map. And that's the evaluation level where you have to start really thinking about what's the best way to use this information.
Right. Yeah. Becomes
and
an
then
everyday application. And
yes,
how you can transfer that to people so they have an immediate understanding versus having to dig in and gather some information on their own.
And if you're doing, I mean, we've used mostly math examples here, but this is where you can start doing like literary analysis and explication. This is where you're starting to write the more in-depth book reports and give details about theme and, you know, what the authorial intent was and that sort of thing. That's the evaluation level as well. And then lastly, you have the creating level. This is where you're not just evaluating someone else's work, but you're putting together something new. You're taking all that you've learned and being able to put together a new creation that somebody else could then take and evaluate.
Yeah.
So you can see these go from the very simple to the very complex, the easy to the difficult. And the hard part about assessing our kids is that if we have a paper test that comes in the back of the book, most of the time those stop at the application level.
Right.
Because a Scantron,
as far as I see, yes.
yeah, your basic kinds of short answer, multiple choice, true, false, and matching questions, they're not going to be able to take you much farther than application. They might be able to do a little bit of analyzing, and maybe, just maybe, they can get into evaluation, but that's a pretty rare thing to see. Most of the time, they're testing those three lower realms, and that's useful, but we also, if we're looking for mastery, we need to be able to test the higher realms as